Bad satirical karaoke in 3, 2, 1.
Digital cameras filmed and played. Camcorders ran on DV tape. Small YouTubers had it made. Those were the days. You could grow a small channel then. The algorithms were still your friend. Oh, Mr. Wouldn't it be nice to see those days again? Even though no one got paid, YouTubers still had fun and played. Let's recap for those memories fade. Those were the days.
Thank you. You can take your earplugs out now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is MultimediaJay Radio Style for Sunday, March 31st, 2019. Let's start the show.
MultimediaJay Radio Style.
Well, now, that satirical parody is dedicated to anybody who may have been relating me to Archie Bunker with how I keep talking about the good old days of YouTube and stuff like that. But it actually is worth talking about exactly what the difference is between the platform in the early days when I got involved as well as today. So today's discussion is going to be about what I like to call the black and white TV era of YouTube, because once upon a time there were quite a few vloggers that were making black and white video blogs, and we'll talk about the reasons why shortly. So last night I pulled a Trump. I was really frustrated, so I jumped on Twitter in the wee hours of the morning. And one of the things that really has me wound up, though, is just the way that this platform has changed for the small user in this decade, actually, as opposed to last decade. And I was thinking, you know, back in the day when people were making black and white video blogs and whatnot, the quality on those at 240p and a 100 megabyte upload limit was such that some of these small channels today where someone might be vlogging into their smartphone, even their selfie cam, which the selfie cameras on smartphones are usually of lesser quality than the main cameras, but even with that amount of quality, it's probably still higher quality than what things were like in the early days when there was a lot more synergy between YouTube and the small creators. Like I mentioned earlier, you could come onto this platform back in the mid-2000s as a nobody and build up an audience for yourself. I've mentioned a few times that I got up to 75 subs and 75 views per upload, because back then, everybody who subscribed to you wanted to watch your stuff. And there wasn't any of this nonsense where the algorithms might mess things up if, say, they're inactive or they don't click on your stuff enough or something along those lines. So, again, we're talking about computers overriding the will of human beings and all the problems that has caused not only on YouTube but on other social media platforms as well. But that's the thing. Back in those days, people were just grabbing their digital cameras to make YouTube videos, if they had one. Otherwise, they used a webcam. So these channels today, where it's just someone with a selfie cam on a smartphone just vlogging, is probably still higher quality than what you could actually build an audience with back in the mid to late 2000s. Now, we are so far removed from this time period that I figured I might as well just reminisce on it and give you folks a bit of a history lesson as to what it was like back in those days and why it is that folks like myself are so frustrated over what this platform has become nowadays. But before we rewind the clock, we have to mention some key moments in YouTube history as to when I think all of this frustration started. I mean, I first was frustrated with crap views after YouTube started tinkering with the algorithm to switch over from views to watch minutes as the main way to measure whether or not to promote content or not. And that's what the computers would use to decide what's going on. And this is the one question I have for YouTube's administrators these days. If watch minutes is such an important metric and it supersedes views completely, how come to this day, as I record this podcast, that I can't go to a video and see the watch minutes? No, seriously. If you go to a video, it shows you the views. But if views were so terrible and watch minutes were so much better that we had to move away from views to watch minutes, why do we still see views when we watch YouTube videos? Why don't we see watch minutes? Why don't we see both? Just some kind of UI or design change to reflect what allegedly is the move that YouTube had to make over 5 years ago. Yeah, the earlier part of this decade. Why is it not there? So many unanswered questions when it comes to how somebody can amount to something on this platform these days. And on a lighter note, before we go talking about what things were like back in the good old days, the screenshot today is the one and only time when I've ever had God as a CAPTCHA. So, I mean, it's probably a nostalgia overload with all the stuff in it to begin with. But one time I saw God as a CAPTCHA to prove that I wasn't a robot. And I was like, hey, look, a sign from God. Yeah, it is. So, bad jokes, of course, back in those days. And we're talking August 2006 here. So this is about before I started trying to do anything on this platform. I already had the channel mostly for watching other videos and other folks' content, but I didn't actually start on my instructional series until later on. I did try some generic video blogs in the summer, but I didn't move forward from that until actually autumn rolled around, September, October of 2006. And because of that initial interest period in uploading content on a regular basis, back in the days when you could still, as a complete nobody, carve out an audience for yourself on this platform, even if you were starting from complete scratch with standard run-of-the-mill equipment, we'll get to that shortly. Because of that initial run of the instructional series from September to December of 2006, winding down after Christmas, because of all that, I tend to put a bit of an emphasis on September through December and autumn in general for this kind of stuff, just kind of as, you know, an old habit and stuff like that. So while we're talking about old stuff, let's get on to, you know, the good old days, as those of us old-timers might say. So, back in the day, there were a lot of vloggers that were uploading black and white videos, not because of some kind of classic silver screen black and white TV thing, but because with the cameras that were available to make YouTube videos back then, it could actually be higher quality for things to be recorded in black and white. You're talking digital cameras among the mainstream. There were camcorders at the time, but we're talking digital cameras and webcams, which didn't have something like white balance, and in some cases they had automatic white balance. So you could be in the middle of recording a YouTube video, and if the color is wrong in the room, you'll go from white to yellow and back as the camera tries to auto-adjust. You're talking about 240p, 100 megabyte upload limit. There was also the 10-minute limit that got rolled out eventually too, which stayed with YouTube like for forever until it finally was started to be rolled back. But the thing is, most mainstream channels of people that just wanted to be YouTubers were grabbing their digital cameras. So, and the digital cameras were lower quality than the camcorders. But what about the camcorders of the day? The camcorders of the day were still made to be plugged in via FireWire and older connectors like that. But the big thing was they were still running off of DV tape. Yeah, there was still tape involved, and you would hook the thing up to your FireWire port on your computer, and the computer would actually operate the rewind and fast forward on the tape part of your camcorder. Now, I had a Canon Allura back in those days because I wanted something with a manual white balance so I could play around with blue screen effects for the first time. And let's just say that if you didn't use the tape, it was a massive quality downgrade to go with SD card mode on that, because back in those days, SD cards just couldn't handle the bandwidth to record any high quality video real time. So if you were recording with what SD cards were available at the time, most likely, and we're talking before SDHC, you were probably using a webcam or a digital camera. And so you're talking lower quality than most camcorders. Matter of fact, that was a selling point of why I switched to the Fuji F50 FD in the late 2000s as my digital camera of choice to record YouTube videos with, because I saw someone give a demonstration in low quality on YouTube, of course, given the restrictions at the time, where the camera versus a DV tape camcorder was actually pretty close, and I thought that was a cool thing. So I wound up getting one of those Fujis until YouTube finally started upgrading some of the quality features available on the site. Besides the aforementioned limits, There was also and the 100 megabyte upload limit. There was no widescreen, and there was also no stereo sound either. And when the features were first rolled out, they weren't publicly available, so you had to add something to the end of a YouTube URL in order to get stereo sound or something better than the generic stuff that was going on. And this actually allowed for some competition at one point of various competing video sites that were implementing something that YouTube didn't have. So livevideo.com, for example, would have widescreen and eventually, stereo sound and eventually widescreen, plus there was no recording limit. But it got to the point where YouTube caught up and surpassed them, and then they couldn't compete. They were the ones that were behind. And then eventually the company that ran livevideo.com just, it folded. And the website was up and down, zombie style, whatever, for a couple of months before finally going away for good. There was also a competing platform called Rever, which allowed you to share ad revenue. Sound familiar? Before YouTube did. So the concentrated coolness went away once YouTube monetization and the partner program started being talked about. But even the arrival of the partner program is too far forward compared to what we want to talk about in terms of what was going on in those days. So yes, mainstream channels were doing what they were doing with digital cameras and webcams. Remember, smartphones weren't a thing until the original iPhone in 2007. And even then, what were the cameras like on the original first generation iPhone? And that's the thing, smartphones have been catching up to discrete devices ever since. But we're talking nearly 10 years before I start wanting a digital camera for stills instead of a smartphone. And with the megapixels that are available nowadays, the last digital camera that I bought was for stealth YouTubing, so to speak. Take it on a trip, it would be smaller than carrying a camcorder around. It wouldn't be a giant soup can either, and it could sneak in some video, but the sound quality wasn't as good. At least it recorded in stereo, though. But camcorders versus digital cameras remained a thing, a trade-off for quite some time. Now, if you were using a webcam, you would be clicking your mouse to start and stop the recording. So some people, if they weren't editing enough, would actually still have the mouse clicks in for their jump cuts. You know how vlogging, traditionally, people jump cut all over the place to get rid of the disturbing mannerisms like the does, ahs, and and stuff like that? People who were doing that with a webcam, you would see them turn away and click the mouse every single cut until they said what they had to say. That's the sort of thing we were talking about here. So you figure, with that kind of low quality available to mainstream users and whatnot, and it got to the point eventually before YouTube started upping their game, where YouTube was synonymous with low quality video in a more mainstream sense. People would, for example, there was an issue with people talking about whether BlizzCon, when they were developing the virtual ticket, should stream online. And I remember one of the things the Blizzard devs were saying was, yeah, we might as well have the virtual ticket, because if we don't, a bunch of shaky YouTube videos are going to pop up the day after all the announcements. So, and of course there was I forgot which comedian it was, but somebody once said that YouTube was like the circular file of low quality content. And a lot of the early experience had a lot to do with this sort of thing. But yeah, we're talking about entry-level channels would have a webcam, mainstream channels would have a digital camera, and only when camcorders were able to finally run on SD cards without a quality drop did we start seeing some evolution towards camcorders. Back in the early days that were the black and white TV era, as I call it, you didn't really need a camcorder unless you wanted to use something like manual white balance. YouTube's quality would just eat up your lack of quality on your source material, and of course, computers were slower, so the video editing that was going on at the time was slower as well, so you didn't want to slam your machine if you could avoid it. So with all of this going on, some people deliberately chose to film video blogs and whatever else they were making for YouTube in black and white, because it was a way to bypass a lot of issues related to low-quality equipment and how it displayed color, as well as if the white balance was uncontrollable and it would change in the middle of you talking or something because the color shifted or something along those lines. But here's the point of all of this, and this is where some of my frustration comes from nowadays. You've got people nowadays with small channels that get like single-digit views. YouTube doesn't really pass their stuff around so they can actually grow an audience. Yet somebody using their selfie cam to video blog nowadays is actually probably higher quality than the original video blogging scene back in those days when people actually got to have audiences and you could start as a total nobody with just a digital camera and Windows Movie Maker and actually build up a following on this platform. Just think about it. Despite the quality issues, we still had channels like Greg Solomon and whatnot filming entirely in black and white. And there were others. Digital Soul was another vlogger I used to watch a lot back then. And he was the one that actually, that showed that, yeah, his equipment would have looked hideous if he filmed in color as opposed to black and white. And that's where I was really introduced to this concept. Because at the time, I started with a Kodak digital camera. Ha ha. Yeah, it had all those problems. But I still insisted on filming in color. And but then I went to the Fuji F50 FD, and it still had automatic white balance, but at least the quality was a little bit higher. But all of this material, including the stuff I have in the dark corner of a drive on Monolith here that I could always put on Daily Motion or something, all of this old material is in an absolute eyesore compared to what's possible today. And yet, despite someone with a smartphone camera probably being higher quality than what built this platform in the first place, you go to small channels, maybe people that subscribe to you, that you look and you're like, oh, look, they actually have videos. You go over there, you see people that get like 3 views and upload, 5 views and upload, 2 views and upload. And even the smartphone vlogging scene nowadays, if someone's just popping out their phone, turning it sideways to not shoot a vertical video, and vlogging into their selfie camera, that's probably still higher quality than what built this site in the first place, and, most importantly, what someone was able to get an audience with. That's where the frustration comes from. It's not so much that the platform is inaccessible, but that the algorithms absolutely crush you unless you bring your audience with you nowadays. Now, some people turn around and they say, oh, but YouTube's oversaturated. That's one of the biggest excuses I've ever seen throughout the history of this platform, and it's always been wrong. Anybody can start making videos. This whole platform has been oversaturated the entire time it has existed, because all you need for an additional person to make videos like what it is that you're making is to impress somebody. You know, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and that applies all over the place in the YouTube ecosystem. So you could be making something, somebody else is like, hey, that looks cool, I want to try making something like that, and bam, you've got someone else making videos just like you, crowding things out, etc., 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 when all you really did was just do a good job and someone liked it. This has been going on since going all the way back to the beginning of the site. The big issue here is what it's like nowadays and just how hopeless and futile it can feel, or if you had an audience, feeling like YouTube is keeping you from being able to have a new audience or something. So that basically means your channel's as good as gone after X amount of time, because people are people. Their interests are going to change over the years, and they may not be interested in what it is that you're doing, and you might not be interested in what it is that you're doing either. You may want to move on to other stuff. But that's the issue with all of this, is that nowadays you can't just have a channel and be happy. It's got to be all this complicated stuff, like watch how you do this, do that, search engine optimization, this, that, the other, get your tags right, get your hashtags right, do you want to join an MCN, da-da-da-da-da, Creator Academy, da-da-da-da, and it takes all the fun out of all of this. Now, there are some people doing this stuff professionally where it is their job, but for somebody who wants to just do something and see what happens, I can tell you right now, the answer is probably not much. And that's the saddest part of all of this. We are awash in the ability to make something besides eyesore videos. You grab your smartphone and vlog, what's the worst that's going to happen? You might have the jello effect because it has a CMOS sensor instead of a CCD, like most cameras these days. And that's been the #1 thing that camera makers have been trying to get around, is the whole jello effect caused by CMOS sensors. Compare that to the eyesore video blogs from the mid to late 2000s from people with digital cameras and webcams, some of which deliberately chose to upload in black and white because it actually looked better back in those days. And you try telling me that there isn't a problem with being able to get an audience these days. Because again, you could be a nobody. All you had to do was put in some effort and it would pay off. That doesn't happen nowadays. So if you want to relate me to Archie Bunker, go right ahead, because I can totally say that yes, there were some good old days with this sort of thing. And really, if anything, we're spoiled nowadays of what we have. But if you look at early YouTube videos from a simpler time when people just made content, you may actually develop an affinity for them and see why someone like me, for example, kicks against the bricks when it comes to some of the SOPs that have come out since then. Like, for example, bugging people to like and subscribe every single video. I do end screens because they're nice and convenient, and mobile devices may benefit from them a bit more by having more stuff you can watch in those little video thingies that pop up at the end of each one. So that was an interesting thing. But if you go to a big tech channel or something, you try and watch the video, and besides the advertising which YouTube needs to pay its bills, now you're seeing in-video advertising as part of the video itself, as well as you get to about 80% through whatever you're watching, and the video's pretty much done. You can click to something else because you know it's just going to be the usual pitch to like, subscribe, click the bell, blah 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 blah. It's just fluff. What else are you going to call it? You know that if you go to watch a YouTube video, there's going to be a sizable chunk of what it is that you're watching that isn't the actual video. And don't even get me started on those obnoxious mid-roll ads. I can't stand those things. Especially on shorter format videos, which I see more of it on Facebook and other platforms nowadays. You'll go to watch a really short 1-minute clip about news or something, and oh look, there's going to be an unskippable ad in 3, 2, 1. Oh look, I should use WikiBuy again. Can I get back to the rest of my 1-minute video that I'm trying to watch while cycling through my Facebook feed or something? What have we done with all of this? So, I recommend, I don't know if you can search for supremely old videos from 2005, 6, and 7 or so. But don't be surprised if you rewind the clock back to those days. If you start developing an affinity for the simpler videos that were uploaded back in those days. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to get back to being a grumpy old guy who's going on and on about the good old days or something. I've probably drawn enough comparisons as it is. Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.